Hey everybody, it's Parshat Vayeshev again, the story of Yosef and his brothers. I can't believe how quickly we got to this again. I feel like it was just the other day that we had this Parsha last year. It's a very difficult Parsha. I'm not even going to try and deal with it. The whole story of how brothers can get together and sell their sibling. It's just so shocking, and we know that the tribes are righteous, are good. And we know that it all kind of happened after the feeling that they were getting, that the siblings were getting, that the tribes were getting, that their father favored Yosef and he bought him this colored coat. And so how could they have even been jealous? And how could Yaakov, who's the typical, like the primary father who had 12 children, he obviously knew what he was doing. He was good at parenting. And, you know, Parenting 101 says that you don't favor one child over the others and you don't create this feeling of jealousy. So I'm sure he knew what he was doing. And what is this? How could all the brothers be jealous? How can they actually send their brother, throw him into a pit initially, which was apparently full of snakes, and then sell him into slavery? It's unbelievable what happened here. And it's too many things, and I'm not even going to go into it. And I think that last year I did, because I remember it so well. Talk about how, you know, it was all meant to be somehow, and we don't understand sometimes why Hashem makes people do certain things or make certain mistakes in judgment. I will get back to that idea, but I'm not going to discuss the ins and outs of the brothers and Yosef. But what I will discuss is the idea that after this happened, after this major tragedy happened in the family, and there was such a rift among the brothers, and one of the brothers, Reuven, really didn't want this selling of their brother to happen into slavery, and he actually came back. He wasn't around when they sold him, and he thought he would save him and take him out of the pit and bring him back to his father. And he comes back to the pit, and the pit is empty, and he didn't even realize what was happening. Anyway, everybody else, when they realized how much pain they were causing their parent, their father, it was just such an unbearable tragedy and they realized they had made some kind of a cosmic mistake, or a major evil was done here. And either it was a mistake, but they thought they were doing the right thing. Apparently they included Hashem in the minyan. There's midrashim that tell us that they wanted a minyan to make a decision. Like it was almost like a court case, and they thought they were doing the right thing. But after this happened, even though they obviously were making some decisions and they thought they were making the right decisions, when they realized finally how terrible the situation was and that they were really the cause of it, there was so much heartbrokenness among the Jewish people at the time. The Jewish people at the time were this whole family, Yaakov and his 12 sons and daughters and wives and so on. This was the Jewish people, and there was such a rift and so much brokenness and despair and sadness that it was one of the worst times in Jewish history at the beginning of the Jewish story. We have this terrible situation, and as a result of this, Yehuda felt so guilty for what he did. He was really the instigator of the sale of Yosef, and it seems like then it says Vayered Yehuda me'al achiv. How does it say this? Hold on. But Vayehi ba'etahi Vayered Yehuda me'et echav. Yehuda went down at that time from among his brothers. And it's not a geographic going down. It seems like what he did is he felt that he was very much lowered, but his position was lowered among the brothers. Everybody was kind of blaming him and saying, you did something really terrible. And that guilt and shame moved him to leave the brothers, leave the family for a while. He went away. He kind of exiled himself. And then the whole situation happened with Yehuda and Tamar, where hold on one sec. Where Yehuda had this illicit relationship with his daughter-in-law, who had dressed up as a prostitute, and he didn't know who he was having relations with. And it turns out, so what are you doing walking around and having relations with a prostitute? Is that something that you do, Yehuda? You're like destined to be a king. You're the top, you're the leader of the generation. What's going on? So it was this terrible brokenheartedness that was going on, and everybody was despairing. But you know what happened out of that relationship between him, Yehuda, and Tamar, is we know that from that union was born, Peretz and Zerach, two twins were born from that union. And obviously twins are two, yes, twins. And Peretz is the father of David HaMelech. Eventually, Peretz then had a child, Oved, then Yishai, and Yishai had David. So Peretz, even though it was a terrible union, it was a terrible state that Yehuda was in, that all of the Jewish people were in, it seems that from this union came Mashiach, came King David, and eventually the Messiah is going to come from that. So there's a medrash about this that says, Ki anochi yadati et hamachshavot. Hashem is saying about this pasuk that Yehuda left his brothers and went down in his status. I know people's thoughts. Everybody was so brokenhearted. Shvatim hayu asukim b'mechirato shel Yosef. The brothers had just been busy with the selling of Yosef. Yosef haya asuk b'sako v'ta'anito. Yosef was in terrible, terrible mourning over the loss of his whole life, the loss of his childhood. He was now thrown into becoming a slave without his family in Egypt. Reuven haya asuk b'sako v'ta'anito. Reuven was in terrible mourning and grieving and trying to do tshuva about what he did and his responsibility. V'Yaakov haya asuk b'sako v'ta'anito. Grieving father. Yaakov was also terribly devastated. And Yehuda was asuk b'sako v'ta'anito. Yehuda was also mourning. Everybody was mourning. It was a terrible time. V'akadosh Baruch Hu haya osek borei oro shel melech hamashiach. What was Hashem busy with? Everybody else was busy mourning and grieving and doing things that seemed really not okay and inappropriate. And Hashem is busy creating the light of Mashiach from among all this chaos and all this difficulty and all this brokenheartedness. So obviously, you know what I'm going to say. I don't even have to say it, right? But we see in our time, it's a terrible time of brokenheartedness. I know so many mothers who are grieving, obviously, and fathers who are mourning and grieving and sad and suffering. We're going through so much pain this year and continuing too far, too much. We are in such difficult times right now. And then beyond, despite all the grieving, and not despite, above and beyond all the grieving, we have like the rifts are starting to show again among the Jewish people. We have rabbis who are just getting up and saying things that don't even make sense, okay? Like for a rabbi to get up and say, oh, even if you don't go to yeshiva, you shouldn't go to the army. Like, okay, that is just like, you just see how the Satan, Yetzer Hara, just came into this rabbi's head and said, okay, how about just throw out this ridiculously damaging statement, okay? Now, I can get in trouble for this. I'm okay with that because I know for a fact, I've heard people who know this rabbi who actually have spoken to him privately about the concept of yeshiva boys going to the army, and he has come out very much for the idea of yeshiva boys going to the army, of the army creating a nice unit, special unit that's going to be specifically created for these boys, that will give them a chance to serve, will give everybody a chance to have a little bit of a reprieve from the army, so that it's actually good for them. And he even wrote a booklet, apparently, about what to do in order to be part of the Israeli army and at the same time retain all your religious needs and so on and so forth. So it doesn't make sense that this happened. It's just the Satan. It's like the Satan knows that when there's this kind of brokenheartedness among the Jewish people, and when it seems like everything is so bad and so sad, this is the time when Hashem is creating the light of Mashiach. From the darkest times, the light of Mashiach is going to come. So it's like the Satan was nervous. He's like, oh my God, Mashiach is coming. I'm going to be out of a job soon. So let me just create another, drama, create another negative, insane monkey wrench in the process of the Geula. And it's just that. you know? And what Netivot Shalom says, which is beautiful, and with this I will end, is that no matter what, before Mashiach comes, there has to be a kusta de chayuta. Before there is any kind of growth, any kind of big light, any kind of big miracle, we always have to have a little spark, like a little spark that's left, even with all the difficulty and with all the lowliness and how everybody is in such a bad state. There has to be a little like spark of starting to get out of that situation. And from that little spark, we can get bigger and greater and greater. And I think that what's going on in this situation and in our generation, what he says there is that the brothers were all so brokenhearted, but they weren't willing to accept the situation. Everybody was grieving in a sakovita anito. That means they were fasting and they were doing tshuva. They were working on fixing the situation. They felt terrible about it, but they weren't accepting the situation. Yaakov was not willing to accept comfort. Isn't that crazy? So he kind of knew that I'm not accepting this situation. This is not okay. And it seems that Yehuda was also not accepting the situation. Everybody was dealing with trying to make things better and trying in their little way to turn things around. And even at least in their grieving and mourning to do tshuva and to try and grow. So I think that's where the Geula started. And that's where Hashem had this like open opportunity to create the light of Mashiach. So I think what we're doing in our generation, we have to ignore the Satan. We have to ignore the Yetzer Hara. We have to say, no, I do not accept this situation. No, I'm not letting this nation go back to what it was like before October 7th. I'm not willing to go back to that. No, there was so much dissent. There was so much arguing and fighting and infighting. And the Jewish people just were like cats and dogs at each other. Religious, non-religious, national religious, and Haredi, and so on and so forth. No, we are not going to accept that situation. And we have to do tshuva, and we have to not listen to these rabbis, okay? But not make a big deal about it. It's just like, okay, he said that. It doesn't reflect on anybody else. It doesn't reflect on the entire Jewish community. It doesn't mean that the Jewish boys don't want to serve in the army. It doesn't mean that we have anything, God forbid, against anybody else. And I want that to be clear. And I went to yesterday an amazing event. It was called a Kululam or Kululem. I don't know exactly what it is. It's like a singing event where they teach you very, very professionally with like hundreds of women. We all went hundreds of women. They teach you a song, and then one sings harmony and one sings the regular, main song. And then together there's this like melting and harmonious, beautiful song that comes out, and they record it and they take pictures and so on. It was an awesome event. I would say about 200 or 300 women were there from what used to be like the Israeli contingent of the Momentum program. So it's called Mothers with Meaning, and there's non-religious women and religious women and Haredi women, and religious and Haredi are the same, but it doesn't seem like they're the same these days. And yet everyone was coming together with such love, all singing together a beautiful song about Emunah and about how things can change. And Mashu yishtaneh po mimachar. Something is going to change here from tomorrow, and we're going to change it. And we're not going to sit back, and we're not going to accept it. And I think it's up to women, because women get along. They don't say crazy things that push rifts among people. We know how to get along. We know how to get along. And I really think that it's our responsibility not to accept any Lashon Hara about any person that is only going to create negativity among the Jewish people. I think it's up to us to only create love and unity and go ahead and push things to change. We have to push things to change. And I just noticed somebody was saying, how the military cemetery on Mount Herzl in Israel, it used to be that for some reason, the army didn't let you put the words Hashem yikom demo. Like all these soldiers are killed in the army, al kiddush Hashem, for the sake of Hashem's name, sanctifying Hashem's name. And for some reason, you weren't allowed to put on the monument, on the stone, Hashem should avenge his blood. It was like too religious. Anyway, one soldier died in this war. I forgot his name, Yudkin. It was a Lubavitch, a Chabad soldier, and his mom just absolutely would not accept this reality, and she insisted on that law changing, that rule that says you can't put the words Hashem yikom damo, Hashem should avenge his blood, on the monument, on the tombstone. And she changed it. She changed it just with quiet persistence. And now, if you go to the military cemetery, almost 95% of the soldiers buried there now have on their tombstones, Hashem yikom demo, Hashem should avenge his blood. Because people, even who've died since 1948, you can go back and rectify that tombstone and add the words. Insane. Okay, like, first of all, that it took so long, but secondly, that a woman did it. A couple of women got together, decided to change something, and that's it. It changed. So I just wish us all a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos and an ability to bring healing to this world. And I see things are changing, and I see that Hashem is bringing the light of Mashiach. I mean, we're just like conquering Syria. That's cool. Conquering the Syrian army. I think now we're going into Yemen. Yeah, sure. Let's just do that. Now we're going to conquer Yemen. I mean, we're literally turning the tide. We already have a nice part of the Hermon, and a new part of the Syrian Hermon. So we can go skiing someday. And I just really hope that the light of Mashiach is going to shine very, very brightly, very, very soon, even before Hanukkah, hopefully. We'll bring the hostages back, healthy in mind and spirit, and that we could just start celebrating. We could just turn things around. And it's up to us, ladies. Have a good Shabbos.